everyone, welcome to Unacademy. This is Astha Raut, your educator, and I'm doing my post-graduation in English Literature from Ramadevi Women's University, Bhubaneswar. This is the last lesson we are going to study in this course, and this is on paraphrasing. A lot of graduation students will be acquainted with this term paraphrasing. So I'll be telling you how to paraphrase a passage. I hope you like it, and do follow me on Unacademy.
Paraphrasing. Well, paraphrasing is defined as rephrasing of the same passage in just other words. Or in simple words, we can also say that it's an interpretation of one's own style, a full sense of the passage written in some other style. Paraphrasing carries a lot of important uses, so we'll be discussing about the uses first. It is an excellent method of training. When I say an excellent method of training, it means it becomes a good taste of a person's ability to understand what he actually reads. Because if he's not reading with a complete concentration, it will turn impossible for him to paraphrase any passage without a firm grasp of its meaning. Secondly, we have a fine training of art of expressing or the art of expression. What one wants to say simply, clearly and directly can be said by the means of paraphrasing. Incidentally, it gives value practice in grammatical and idiomatic compositions as well. A man who has once acquired the art of intelligent reading and of lucid expression has received no mean measure of education. Well, the next use of paraphrasing is the simple method of explanation. Indeed, it is one of the best way of explaining an involved or ornament passage of prose or of any other piece of poetry in a simple manner. So thus, the annotators of a poem often make use of this paraphrasing so that they convey the meaning of the prose to the people. So now that we are done with the uses of paraphrasing, we'll come to a good paraphrase writing. We'll discuss about the paraphrasing of a prose and a poetry, both of them as well. Well, the first one is translation. When I say translation here, it doesn't mean the translation from one tongue into another, but it is a translation of a man's words into the words of another in the same language. So a translation must be accurate and explanatory to be of any value. So a paraphrase must faithfully produce or reproduce and interpret the thought of an original passage. Once the translation you have understood, now we have to go to the fullness of the paraphrase. Well, paraphrasing differs from summarizing or précis writing, inasmuch as a paraphrase must reproduce not only the substance or general meaning, but also every minute detail of the passage. Nothing in an original may be left unrepresented in a paraphrase. It is therefore a full reproduction of the original text. While nothing in the original is to be unpresented or unrepresented in a paraphrase, whereas also nothing is to be added to it. To insert ideas or illustrations of your own is not allowed in a paraphrase. A paraphrase must be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. After the fullness of a paraphrase, we'll come to the wholeness. In paraphrasing, the passage to be paraphrased must be treated as a whole. The practice of taking the original line by line or sentence by sentence and simply turning these into different words is not paraphrasing at all. Until the passage is grasped as a whole, no attempt should be made to paraphrase it. This is not an easy task and calls for imagination and concentration of thoughts, but unless we can do it, we shall never produce a good paraphrase. Well, lastly, a good paraphrase it has to be a well-constructed piece of prose. It should in itself be perfectly clear and intelligible, without any reference to the original passage. A paraphrase should be a piece of good paraphrase so that anyone would understand and read with pleasure, even if he had never seen the original text anyway. All the explanation that is required must be in a paraphrase itself. The insertion of explanatory notes in a confession is a failure of paraphrasing. One must paraphrase in a way so that the reader will not have to refer to the original text to understand its meaning. It must be clear and independent. So we are done with the paraphrasing of a prose. We'll come to a paraphrasing of a poetry now. Well, in a poetry, poets often use archaic or unusual words that are no longer in the colloquial speech and which are not generally found in prose writing. These archaic phrases or words have to be replaced, and in paraphrasing, the modern equipments or the equivalents shall be substituted with such words. For example, say for I ween, they use I ween for I think, or for lady, they use dame. All these archaic phrases have to be replaced by the modern usage. The next point we need to know is the difference in the order of words. Inversion takes place. Any change in a normal grammatical order of the words leads to the complete change in the sentence. The subject, the verb, and the object. They tend to use their orders when it comes to the change that is done when you are paraphrasing a poetry. Well, poetry is fascinating, so is its language. So the next point we have to remember is in a paraphrase or while paraphrasing, the ornamental language has to be cut down and it has to be in a very simple language. The poem or the poetry already has very ornamental language, so we did not need to use any other ornamental languages there. So we'll just keep it simple and we'll just translate or replace it with easier words. Lastly, there's this major use of the principle here. In a paraphrase or while paraphrasing, there is no rhythm or there is no rhyming scheme that you have to follow. It's not a poetry but a piece of prose, so there is no place for this. All the poetic characteristics of a poetry has to be eliminated while you are paraphrasing it. So it might not sound as sweet as a poetry, but that would be a paraphrase. So there are a few important things you need to remember when you are paraphrasing a poetry. So the first one would be the best way to deal with a metaphor is to convert it into a simile. Secondly, we should restore the concrete, rather than using abstract, we must use concrete. After that, we have rephrasing of the rhetorical questions. The questions must be changed into direct affirmations or negations. The exclamations should be turned into statements. Well, these are the few points that you need to remember when you want to paraphrase a poetry in a good way. Now that we are done with the techniques of paraphrasing in prose and poetry and the uses also, we'll just come to the methods of procedure. Well, because no one can paraphrase a passage which he does not understand, so first, the reading of the passage slowly and carefully until you feel that you have finally grasped its meaning is the best thing to do. So keep reading until and unless you get the meaning of the prose or a poetry. Next would be read the passage again with a view of its details. Note all uncommon or difficult words, the use of grammar, the constructions, the metaphors and the figure of speech. Remember every minute detail so that it becomes easier for you to paraphrase it. Next, you have to rearrange the order of sentences and even the whole passage. This will help you in making the meaning of it very clear. Then you have to use appropriate words. So do not change words simply for the sake of changing it. After the appropriate choices of words, there is explanatory notes. Well, you should never add any explanatory notes at the end of a paraphrase. In case you do that, this indicates that your paraphrase is not clear and you have failed to do a good paraphrasing. A common fault that is done by everyone is the repetitions. So avoid doing repetitions and keep it completely simple. Then write out the rough draft of a paraphrase first and read it aloud. Because sometimes the ear can detect a blemish which the eyes overlooks, So read it aloud so that you can figure out some mistakes that is left behind. After all this is done, you have to prepare the final work. You must remember your final work should satisfy all these points that I have told you, the methods. So we are done with the lesson here and we have the trivia at the end. So paraphrasing comes from paraphrases. So paraphrases is a Greek word and it means equivalent sentences. Thus simplify it. So that's all for this lesson. I hope you liked it. And we are done with the course as well. So I really hope after all the lessons you have ended up with new ideas on writing and improving your writing skills. So thank you everyone. Do follow me on Unacademy.